The pressure breach alarm on corridor D7 was a sound I knew the way I knew my own breathing, 3 short pulses, 1 long, repeating at 6-second intervals until someone in maintenance acknowledged the signal. I acknowledged it from the service office, told the system I was en route, and pulled my toolkit from the cart before the second cycle finished. Jenin at the bay desk looked up. "Junction 9 again." "Junction 9, I said. "Tell Amal my lunch is in the second drawer. I'll get it when the corridor clears." The gasket. The gasket has been the gasket 8 months running, will be the gasket until they send the right composite grade from procurement, which they have not yet elected to do despite my asking. I fitted the toolkit strap over my shoulder. 40 minutes, maybe. Run the standard D-corridor containment protocol. He was already on the comm. I headed down the passage toward D7. Threshoveth 9 was not a large station. 12 species handled on a good cycle. Transit layovers, cargo transfers, the secondary Velkareth corridor through Bay 14, the outer compact run that connected us to the next 3-way stations on the far side of the Thresh sector boundary. Modest operation. Steady work. The kind of posting that suited people who liked knowing what they were going to encounter most days and liked encountering it competently. I had been here 6 years. Before that, 15 years on frontier survey crews, outer margin work, the Thresharan sector mostly, 4 years running the perimeter survey on the Velkareth boundary before it was formalized. Long days in tight crawl spaces, pressure readings and mineral assessments, and the particular exhausting satisfaction of documenting a thing that had not been documented before. I came back in when a combination of needs and a good job offer aligned correctly. Station maintenance was honest work. A thing was broken, you fixed it. You knew you'd fixed it because it stopped being broken. There was a clarity to that which I appreciated more the older I got. The D7 junction panel was exactly where I expected it, and doing exactly what I expected. Hairline failure in the secondary gasket, same point, same manner, the pressure differential from the corridor seal working at the 1 weak spot in a gasket that was the wrong composite grade for this application. I had put in 3 requisition requests in 8 months. The third had been pending for 3 months. The junction seal and I had developed a reliable relationship. It failed every 6 weeks or so. I came and contained the breach and wrote a report, and nothing further happened until it failed again. I crouched down, opened the panel housing, confirmed the breach was minor and contained to the immediate junction space with no corridor penetration beyond the seal point, and began the pressure containment procedure. Standard process. About 20 minutes to full stabilization once I had the temporary seal in place, plus another 8 to 15, while the station system ran its confirmation sweep. I was about 4 minutes into the procedure when I heard the sound from the alcove. It was a small sound, not a distress sound, more the sound of someone adjusting their position against a hard surface and not quite managing it quietly. It came from 12 meters up the corridor, from the recessed equipment bay that served D7's manual override function, and also served, in practice, as a reasonably quiet place to eat lunch when the main office had too much going on. I straightened up and looked down the corridor. D7 was not on any passenger route. It was not signed from the passenger concourse. It was not the kind of corridor that transit layover passengers wandered into by accident, because there was nothing on the passenger side of the station that pointed toward it. To find the D7 alcove, you had to know enough about the station's maintenance layout to know it existed, and most people who knew that were station crew. The person in the alcove was not station crew. She was on the floor, back against the equipment rack, one leg extended at a careful angle that told me immediately she had hurt the ankle or the knee. She was small, slight, close to my height but narrower, built compactly the way some people are built who have spent time in environments where excess bulk is a liability. She was wearing a plain transit tunic, dark fabric, no insignia, the the kind of anonymous garment that transit passengers sometimes wear when they want to look like they're not interesting. Her skin was a warm copper color, not the flush of effort or temperature, but its own color, a deep copper amber that caught the overhead maintenance light at a slight delay, as if considering the light before deciding what to do with it. Her hair was close-cropped and dark. Her eyes, when she looked up at me, were a deep amber gold with a thin silver ring at the outer iris edge, the kind of detail you don't see in the standard species briefings and can't stop noticing once you've noticed it. She looked at me the way people look at you when they're deciding whether to pretend nothing is wrong. People who are good at pretending nothing is wrong do it faster. She was very good at it, but the corridor light was honest, and the ankle angle was not something she could adjust for. "Junction 9 breach," I said, because it seemed like a reasonable thing to explain without requiring her to explain anything. "Sealed now. The station will run a containment confirmation. All clear on the D corridor will come through in about 20 minutes. She nodded, small and precise. "You're hurt," I said. "I'm fine." I had heard that line in a number of different languages and registers over 20 years of outer margin survey work and 6 years of station maintenance. It sounded the same across all of them when a person was alone in an unfamiliar place and uncertain about what came next. "Knee or ankle," I said. A pause, not a long one but deliberate. She was deciding what information to offer. "Ankle," she said. The pressure seal released while I was passing the junction. The differential knocked me off balance. I went down on the side. "The door locks fast," I said. "Faster than the standard spec because the D corridor was installed before the revised seal speed protocol. I've put in a report on that as well." I crouched down, not close, just getting out of the overhead light angle so I wasn't looming at her from above. "Can you put weight on it?" "I haven't tried." "All right." I looked at the ankle without touching it. The boot was holding, no visible distortion through the material, which meant either the injury was soft tissue only or the boot was good enough quality to contain visible swelling in the short term. Either way, floor was not the right place for it. The alcove has a fold-down bench. It would be better than the floor for the next 20 minutes. She considered that. Not nervously, I stopped reading it as nervousness fairly quickly, because nervousness has a specific quality of looking for exits, and she was not looking for exits. She was looking at me the way you look at a piece of information you're assessing for accuracy and use. "I don't require assistance," she said. "I know you don't," I said. "I need to check the manual override in the alcove anyway." "If you're going that direction at the same time, that's not assistance. That's two separate people doing two separate things that happen to coincide." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "All right." I stood, moved to the alcove, and checked the manual override panel, which did not need checking. Then I turned back. She had gotten herself to one knee and was attempting to complete the rise under her own management, and the ankle was not cooperating in the way she wanted. The only visible sign of this was a tightening at the outer corners of her eyes, the kind of expression management that becomes second nature to people who have learned to keep their face from reporting what their body is doing. I moved to her right side. I offered my arm at a height that made functional sense, not low and extended like I was performing helpfulness, not high and formal, just there at the right angle for a hand to take if a hand wanted to. She took it, efficiently, without comment, the way you take a fixed railing on an unfamiliar ship, not because you need to be saved but because the railing is there, and using it is simply correct. We covered the distance to the bench. She sat, adjusted the ankle's angle, tested the weight distribution of the bench seat, made some internal assessment about the equipment rack and shifted slightly so she could rest her left shoulder against it if she chose. Then she was still. I pulled the equipment rack out from the wall a few centimeters on her side, so the shoulder option was real rather than theoretical, and sat down on the floor across from her with my back against the opposite wall. There was only one bench. She needed it more than I did, and I had sat on worse than the D7 alcove floor in considerably less comfortable circumstances. 20 minutes, she said. Around that. The system's conservative, it'll run the full sweep regardless of what the panel shows. Might be 17, might be 22. She nodded again. She was cataloging the alcove. I could see it in the way her attention moved, the emergency supply rack, the manual override panel, the secondary access hatch at the far end, the pressure readout on the wall. Not anxiously. Methodically, she was building a map of the space. "You're not a transit passenger," I said. Not a question. I didn't make it a question because I wasn't asking whether I was stating an observation, which is a different thing. She looked at me with those amber gold eyes. "What makes you say that?" "Transit passengers don't end up in D7. This corridor doesn't connect to any passenger route, and the signage from the concourse doesn't point here. You'd have to know the station's maintenance layout to find this alcove from the transit side. You came here knowing where you were going, or you know how stations work well enough to navigate them without signage. Either way, you're not a standard transit layover." A pause. "I'm not lost," she said. "I didn't think you were," I said. I looked at the pressure readout. The containment was holding, the differential normalizing on the D side, everything proceeding correctly. "I find stations easier to understand through their maintenance infrastructure than through their passenger routes," she said, after a moment. "The passenger corridors show you the station they want you to see. The service passages show you how the station actually operates." "That's accurate," I said. "I know it is," she said. "That's why I use them." She said it without arrogance, stating a method she had arrived at through observation, the same way you'd state that the secondary gasket fails at a different harmonic than the primary. "What do you hear in the service passages that you don't hear in the passenger corridors?" I said. She considered the question, really considered it, the way people consider questions when they find them interesting rather than when they're just managing a conversation. "Honesty," she said. "A maintenance corridor doesn't know it's being evaluated. It shows you what it is. The wear on the panel seals, the condition of the conduit runs, the response time of the breach protocols, the quality of the composite on the junction housings. A passenger corridor is dressed for visitors. A maintenance corridor is just working." I thought about the junction panel I just sealed. The wrong grade composite that had been generating failure reports for 8 months. The 3 replacement requests pending in the procurement system. "This corridor is telling the truth about the procurement delay," I said. She glanced toward where the junction panel was, beyond the alcove's view. "Secondary gasket failure. The harmonic when it fails is higher than a primary failure, shorter interval, sharper pitch, which means the composite is the wrong grade for the pressure differential this junction experiences. A primary failure sounds lower and lasts longer because it's a structural issue, not a material mismatch." I looked at her. "You know pressure seals," I said. "I've learned a number of things," she said. "Pressure seal acoustics is one of them." She said it the same way she said everything, not to impress, not to establish position, but because it was simply the fact of the matter and stating it seemed like the appropriate response to the observation. "How long have you been learning things like that?" I said. "Since I was young," she said. "I found it more useful than the other curriculum." "What was the other curriculum?" She looked at the pressure readout on the wall for a moment. "Court protocols," she said. "Diplomatic register. The correct forms of address for 47 categories of visiting dignitary. How to sit at a formal table for 6 hours and appear interested in whatever is being discussed." A pause. "I can still do all of those things." I simply found the other curriculum more informative, about how things actually work. I had a picture of that, a young person who had been taught all the formal things and had also, quietly and probably without anyone particularly noticing, been teaching themselves the other things at the same time. It was a recognizable portrait. Some people who end up on the outer margins came from formal backgrounds that they'd traded in for something more honest, and they learned to move between those two registers the way some people learn to move between languages. You said you weren't lost, I said, so you knew where D7 was. I mapped the station layout from the secondary bay records when I arrived. The maintenance infrastructure maps are usually available in the secondary bay because transfer crews use them for cargo routing. Transit passenger records don't include them. She shifted the ankle slightly, a small exploratory test, then settled it back. D7 is the longest continuous maintenance corridor in the station's intersection, good for understanding how the original build connects to the retrofitted sections. The retrofit seam is in the ceiling of the service passage, I said, about 30 meters back from the junction. I saw it, she said. The original composite and the retrofit composite have different surface textures. The original is rougher, they used a higher aggregate mix. The retrofit is smoother. You can see where the builders matched the junction points, but didn't match the material. 10 years ago, I said, before my posting, I've resealed 3 of those retrofit junction points since I arrived. The original sections hold better. They usually do, she said. Original builds were overspecified. The engineers didn't know yet exactly how much the material needed to hold, so they overbuilt to compensate. That kind of overcaution becomes durability over time. I thought about that. I had maintained the original inner hull of this station for 6 years, had mapped it, tracked it, filed reports on it, and I had never thought about the fear of the original builders. The uncertainty they had built into the specifications because they didn't yet know what they needed to know. That's a useful frame, I said. Most things become more useful when you understand what the person who built them was afraid of, she said. My handheld showed the containment reading stabilizing. The system would begin its confirmation sweep shortly. I had, by my estimate, another 12 to 15 minutes in the D7 alcove. After a while, sitting with the pressure readout in the equipment rack in the maintenance alcove, I noticed something, the quality of the silence. She was not working to fill it. She was not monitoring it for signs that it should end. She was simply in it, resting the ankle, watching the readout, present in the space in the same way the equipment rack was present in the space, occupying it without explaining itself. I had been in enough confined spaces with enough different people to know how rare that was. People who were not comfortable in quiet tended to manage it. People who were comfortable in it simply inhabited it. She inhabited it. I thought about what she had said about the accurate picture, about arriving at a station before the station knew you were arriving, in order to see what was actually there. I thought about the 10 years I had spent in tight survey crawl spaces, in the silence between instrument readings, in the kind of work that required you to be quiet long enough for the data to show itself honestly. There was a discipline in that, not a passive discipline. You had to actively refrain from projecting what you expected to find. You had to let the reading come to you. She was doing something similar, had been doing it, I thought, for longer than the 11 days on this route, longer than the transit tunic and the secondary bay manifest. It was a habit of approach that went down to something deeper. Where are you headed in the station? I said. The transit registration desk, Bay 2. Bay 2 was on the upper level, far side of the station from D7, crossed the main concourse, up 2 levels, the full length of the upper transit corridor. On a good ankle, 6 or 7 minutes. On the ankle she currently had longer, and the main concourse at this hour was active, not the easiest environment to move through carefully. My route out of D7 runs through the East Gallery, I said. It's the long way back to the main station, but it avoids the concourse entirely. The gallery has seating. It's an observation access corridor on the outer hull, so it runs long and quiet. And from the east end of it the service lift goes directly to level 2, which puts you 2 minutes from Bay 2. She looked at me. That's considerably out of your way, she said. My shift has some flexibility built in for exactly this kind of situation, I said. A pause. She was assessing the offer not suspiciously, not with calculation, but with the same careful practicality she'd used on everything else, checking that it made sense before accepting it. "All right," she said, "thank you." The all-clear came through at the 17-minute mark. I helped her off the bench. She took the arm with the same efficient, unsentimental practicality as before, the way she had done everything so far, which was to use what was useful without making a performance of using it, and we started toward the D7 junction exit. She walked carefully. The ankle was working, but she was compensating for it. The weight shifted right, the stride slightly shortened on the left, the kind of managed adjustment that uses more concentration than walking normally and shows up in small ways if you know what you're watching for. I adjusted my pace to let her set the speed. She noticed. I could tell because her shoulders relaxed a degree, which was the only sign she gave that she had been ready for me to expect her to keep up. I locked the D7 junction and tagged it for the follow-up report I'd file at end of shift. We went through the D-section service passage, conduit runs, access hatches, the seam in the ceiling where the original composite met the retrofit material, visible exactly where she described it. She glanced at it as we passed. "The junction point on the east side of the seam," she said. "The one closest to junction 9. The original side is holding, but the interface between the original and the retrofit, there's a stress pattern developing." I had been noting that stress pattern for 2 years. It was in my maintenance log. It hadn't reached threshold yet, but it was moving. "It's in the report," I said. "I thought it would be," she said. We moved through the rest of the service passage. She asked me, at one point, about the cargo routing for the secondary bay, how the Velorvath corridor transfers were managed, what the typical transit interval looked like, whether the secondary bay had expanded its handling capacity in the last year. Not like someone making conversation, like someone who wanted accurate numbers and expected to receive them. I gave her accurate numbers. She noted them with the same small nod she'd been giving since the alcove. At one point, she stopped entirely at a junction box recessed into the wall, just past the seam where the retrofit composite ended and the original resumed. She looked at it for a few seconds, not long, and then looked at the surrounding panel work, the way the bracket on the left side sat slightly off the horizontal and the bracket on the right side didn't. "This box was replaced after the retrofit," she said. "The brackets don't match the housing alignment. Someone replaced the box without matching the retrofit-era brackets to the original mounting points." 4 years ago, I said, before I arrived. The previous coordinator noted it in the transition log. It functions, so it wasn't prioritized for correction. "The left bracket will work loose in another cycle or two, when the temperature variance stresses the composite enough." She looked at it for one more second, then continued walking. "I'll note that as well." I didn't ask her to note it. She wasn't offering. She was simply doing the thing that was obviously correct to do in the same tone she'd have used to note that the courier was on the express line, or that the step at the East Gallery junction was 15 centimeters down. She was, I had begun to understand, someone who cataloged correct things to do and then did them, without requiring the situation to have offered her a formal invitation. I filed a mental note to add the junction box bracket to the maintenance log when I got back to the office. It wasn't a note I would have had without her. At the junction before the East Gallery, I told her the step down was about 15 centimeters. She managed it without the arm, which meant the ankle was improving. She took the step carefully and continued. We came out into the East Gallery. It ran 40 meters along the outer hull, a long, quiet corridor with viewport panels on the hull side and panel access hatches on the station side. The kind of space that was technically for inspection access, and in practice, was used for almost nothing because There were more efficient ways to inspect the outer hull and fewer efficient ways to find 40 meters of quiet in a working transit station. What it had was the transit lanes. At this hour, the approach lanes were active, 3 carriers in standard formation, staggered at the correct interval, proceeding toward the bays. A Velkareth courier was running the express line low-profile hull built for speed, its running lights precise and purposeful against the dark. A compact freight hauler was holding at the outer marker, waiting on a bay assignment, its navigation lights patient. And beyond all of them, the corridor opened into the broader dark of the Thresh sector, and you could see, if you knew where to look, the faint beacon string of the next way station out, a regular pulse, steady and quiet. She stopped. She stopped completely, in the way that has nothing to do with the ankle and everything to do with the thing you have walked into without expecting it. The transit lanes through the viewport panels, the formation of carriers, the courier on the express line, the hauler at the marker, the beacon string. I did not hurry her. I went to the bench near the inner wall, where I sat on the days when my lunch ended up interrupted by junction seal failures, and I ate it in the gallery instead of the service office, and sat down, and let her stand at the viewport as long as she needed to. The carriers in formation completed their approach and dropped below the gallery's sightline toward the lower bays. The courier on the express line passed the station, fast, gone in less than 3 seconds, its running lights a clean line of color, and then nothing. The freight hauler at the outer marker received its assignment and began the slow turn toward approach. She stood at the viewport for most of that. I did not watch her watching it. That seemed like the wrong kind of attention. But I was aware of her in the way you're aware of the other person in any quiet room. She was still in the way that people who have been moving and arranging themselves and managing a situation are still when the situation briefly stops demanding arrangement. There was something in the transit lanes for her that was something for me as well. The scale of it. The ordinary purposeful movement of vessels that didn't know they were being watched and didn't need to. The beacon string, patient and indifferent, marking the distance to the next stop on a run that continued past the edges of what either of us could see from here. I had eaten a great number of interrupted lunches in this gallery. I had sat on this bench through the end of a number of afternoon shifts, logging a few last notes before heading back to the main section. I had never thought to describe why I kept returning to a space that was, technically, an inspection access for outer hull panels, and that nobody else in the station appeared to use. What she had said, somewhere to sit quietly and look at what's actually there, was precise enough that I couldn't find a better version of it. She turned away from the viewport and came to the bench. She sat down, leaving appropriate space, and looked out at the transit lanes from the bench angle, which was lower than the viewport and showed more of the beacon string and less of the immediate approach. "The Velorveth secondary corridor," she said. "Bay 14. Secondary bay. Transit and transfer, not long haul. The corridor's been more active in the last year. The outer compact traffic has increased since the last transit agreement cycle." She was quiet. The freight hauler completed its turn and began its approach steady. "I should have arrived through the primary bay," she said. "The primary bay has more thorough documentation on arrival, formal manifest, arrival notification to the relevant station personnel, the standard greeting protocol. Secondary bay uses transit observer classification," I said. "Different manifest requirements, lighter documentation." "Yes," she said. I understood then, without needing her to explain further. The secondary bay and the observer classification, and the plain transit tunic, and the maintenance routes, and the choice not to contact whoever was waiting for her in the rest of the station. There was a specific way that certain people traveled when they wanted to arrive somewhere before the weight of who they were arrived with them. I had worked the outer margins long enough to recognize it, and to know that my job in that situation was exactly what it had always been, to fix the things that were broken in my corridor, and to mind my own business about everything else. We sat with the transit lanes. She asked me about the outer margin survey work. Not conversationally, she asked the way she asked about the cargo routing numbers, wanting accuracy. What the Thresharon sector perimeter had looked like before the boundary formalization. What kind of work a survey crew did in practice, as opposed to what the official documentation described. Whether the original survey assessments had matched what the later formalization used. I told her what I knew. The Thresharon work had been primarily atmospheric and geological assessment, with a secondary component of species contact documentation, mapping who was already using which corridors, what the transit patterns looked like before there was formal transit infrastructure to impose patterns on. The official documentation had used the survey data correctly in some respects, and had simplified it in others, the way official documentation always did, turning a complicated actual picture into a cleaner formal picture that could be administered. The accurate picture versus the comfortable one, she said. Yes, I said. The survey crews worked with the accurate one. The formal record is the comfortable one. Which is more useful? Depends what you're doing, I said. If you're trying to administer the corridor, you need the comfortable one. It's stable enough to make rules from. If you're trying to understand the corridor, you need the accurate one. The comfortable one tells you what people agreed to say about what's there. The accurate one tells you what's actually there. She looked at me sideways. Which do you prefer? I'm a maintenance coordinator, I said. I work with what's actually there. The panel is either leaking or it's not. The composite is either the right grade or it isn't. I don't get to work with the comfortable version. No, she said, I suppose you don't. She shifted the ankle, tested it deliberately, assessed what she found. The improvement from the alcove was real. She was putting more weight on it, holding it at a less compensated angle. I've been on this transit route for 11 days, she said, evaluating the outer compact corridor. The stations along this run are central to the Velorvath transit agreement. If they're functioning properly, genuinely functioning, not performing function for an evaluation, then the agreement serves the purpose it was designed to serve. If they're performing, then the agreement rests on a picture that was constructed for the visit rather than on what's actually there. The comfortable version, I said. Yes. A pause. Every station on this run was notified before my arrival. Their manifest records were prepared. Their personnel were briefed. When I arrived at those stations through the primary bay, I arrived into the version of the station that had been assembled for the arrival. And you couldn't tell the difference, I said. I could tell some differences, she said, but a well-prepared station looks very much like a well-run station. The only way to see what's underneath is to arrive at the place the preparation didn't reach. D7, I said. D7, she said, and the secondary gasket that's been wrong for 8 months, and the requisition requests in the right tier for the wrong specification, and the stress pattern developing at the retrofit interface in the service passage. She looked at the junction panel readout on the gallery wall. And the East Gallery, which is technically an inspection access, and which actually serves as somewhere to sit quietly and think, which is a different function from what the records say it has, and which is a more valuable one. I had been on the station for 6 years, and I had never heard anyone say that about the East Gallery. I had thought it imprecisely, in the way you know something is true without having found the exact words, but I had not heard anyone say it. What does the D7 corridor tell you about this station? I said. She thought about that for a moment. That was clearly real thought and not performance. It tells me the station is working, she said. Genuinely working. The junction seal has failed repeatedly, and the requisition requests are in the system, And the wrong specification issue exists because of a procurement tier reclassification 4 years ago that was never communicated to the affected stations. That's not a failure of this station. That's a failure of the reclassification process. The station is doing exactly what it should be doing, identifying the problem, reporting it accurately, and continuing to operate the corridor safely despite the unresolved issue. She looked out at the transit lanes. A station that was performing well for an evaluation wouldn't have an unresolved requisition request. It would have found a way to fix the problem before I arrived, or hidden the record of the problem, or simply not had the problem because someone would have called in a favor to resolve it quickly. The fact that the problem is still there, honestly, in the record, is evidence of a station that works the same way regardless of who is watching it. I let that sit for a moment. I didn't know about the procurement reclassification, I said. 4 years ago. The specification for outer compact way station maintenance composites was moved from one procurement category to another. The new specification list was distributed to the central stations. The outer stations were supposed to receive a secondary distribution that never happened. Your requisition requests went to the right tier for the old specification. The old tier doesn't handle the new specification. She paused. I'll note it. The correct procurement reference for the specification you need will be sent to your station record system. She said it exactly the way you'd say I'll pick that up on the way back. A small, practical action that she was in a position to take and would take because it was the obvious correct thing to do. I looked at the beacon string through the viewport. Steady, regular, the next station out on the Thresholvath run. I heard the footsteps in the service passage before she reacted to them, but only by a second. The particular rhythm of people who are searching, moving faster than casual movement, quieter than they wanted to be, the specific controlled urgency of personnel who have been looking for something that didn't tell them where it was going. She heard it too. My attendants, she said. She did not sound alarmed. She sounded like someone confirming something they had known was coming. They've been looking for a while, I said. Since I didn't check in at the standard interval at the transit desk. She straightened slightly on the bench, not dramatically, but the posture adjusted, something in the set of her shoulders that hadn't been there a moment ago, a second register settling into place. They'll come through the service passage entrance, the main concourse access at the far end, and the lift lobby. They'll cover this corridor in 3 to 4 minutes. We had, by my count, perhaps 2 minutes left of whatever this had been. She turned to look at me. The amber gold eyes and the silver ring and the gallery light and the transit lane light through the viewport, and the ankle that was better than it had been, and the transit tunic that had been chosen specifically to look like it wasn't interesting, and the 11 days on this route looking for the accurate picture. She said very quietly, "Do you know I'm a princess human?" The gallery held the question for a moment. Outside, the freight hauler was settling into its bay approach. I let the moment be what it was. Then I said, "No, I didn't know that." She watched me, waiting for what would come next. "I'm thinking about whether it changes anything," I said. "Give me a second." A pause. The freight hauler's running lights crossed the lower edge of the viewport and disappeared. "No," I said. "Your ankle still needs another 15 minutes before I'd put it on the service lift stairs without question, and the lift lobby is right there." I indicated the east end of the gallery. Bay 2 is 2 minutes from the top. She looked at me for a moment that I don't have clean words for, something in the arrangement of the silver ring and the copper-amber skin, and the expression that had been so carefully maintained for the past hour and a half and which was, right now, in this gallery, not entirely maintained. I understood in that moment that this was not the first time she had revealed something true about herself, but I thought it might be the first time she had done it to someone who had not been treating her as anything particular first. The corridor, the bench, the pace, none of that had been offered with any knowledge of what she was. It had been offered to a person in a locked corridor with a hurt ankle, which was the complete picture available to me, and I had worked with what was there. She had never, I thought, been received before the information arrived. The information always came first, the title, the designation, the formal record, and then the treatment followed accordingly. That was the only sequence she knew. D7 had changed the sequence. "My name is Velsorn Keithai," she said, "third heir of the Velorveth sovereignty." "Oren Mies," I said, "station maintenance coordinator, formerly Outer Margin Survey Crew, Thresharon Sector." "You told me." "You told me yours twice," I said. "Seemed like the right form." A pause, then something shifted in her face. Not a smile exactly, but the muscular precursor to one, held just short of completing. She moved back to the bench and sat. Different from before, the posture that had settled in when she heard the footsteps was still present, but something underneath it was also present, and the two were occupying the same space without conflict. "I've been on this route for 11 days, she said, "and before this station, on the 4 before it, I arrived at everything that had been prepared for me. I saw what had been assembled to be seen." She looked at the transit lanes. "This is the first corridor I found on my own." "D7 is not a corridor people generally seek out," I said. "The standard briefing for each station gives me the primary bay arrival documentation, the senior station personnel, the agenda for the formal review." She paused. "It does not give me the East Gallery. It does not give me someone who adjusts his pace without being asked to." I thought about the pace. I hadn't thought about it at the time. It had just been the obvious thing, the way you calibrate any physical work to the conditions you're actually in rather than the conditions you'd prefer. You move at the speed the job requires, not the speed you'd prefer to be moving at. That's not patience, exactly, it's just accuracy. Reading what's in front of you correctly and responding to what's actually there. "Someone told me a long time ago," I said, "that the most useful thing on a survey crew is knowing when to wait for the readings rather than hurrying them. You get better data. Costs you some time, but the data's worth it." "Who told you that?" "Crew chief, first outer margin posting. She was not wrong about many things." Velsorn Keithai looked at me. "What happened to the survey crew?" "Still out there," I said. "I stayed in. A few of them retired. Most of them are still running outer margin assessments somewhere on the Thresharon boundary. Good work." "Do you miss it?" I thought about it honestly. Some days, the scope of it, you were mapping something that hadn't been mapped. That has a particular feeling. I looked at the East Gallery, the viewport panels, the transit lanes outside. This work has a different feeling, more stable. I know this station. I know what it needs, and I know when what it needs isn't being provided, and I know how to keep it running in the meantime. That's not a small thing. "No," she said, "it isn't." "You know it very well," she said, and then corrected herself, not aloud, but I could see the correction in the slight pause because she had already said that in the alcove about the station in general. She said instead, "You've made something of it." "I've tried to," I said. "The work lets you. Well enough to know when something's wrong, and when it's just taking time to be right." The service passage door opened. 2 attendants, sovereignty tunic and rank sash, the controlled relief expression of people who have found the thing they were looking for and are managing the finding carefully. They stopped when they saw her. One of them spoke Velorvath formal register, which I didn't follow entirely, but the shape of it was an inquiry about her well-being and a noting of the interval since the last check-in. She answered in the same register. A short exchange, the ankle, the corridor incident, the all clear on the D section. Then she gave what was clearly an instruction, because the second attendant pulled out a record tablet. She looked back at me. "The procurement reference for the D7 specification," she said. "I've asked Velthar to note it. You'll receive it through the station record system by end of your shift today, through the correct procurement channel. The 4th requisition request, submitted with that reference, should clear within 2 supply cycles. "Thank you," I said. She stood, carefully but less carefully than the alcove. The ankle was carrying proper weight now. The attendants moved to flank her at a respectful distance, and the whole arrangement of the east gallery shifted, because she was not, in this arrangement, the person in the plain transit tunic who had found the D7 corridor interesting. She was the person the attendants were flanking. Both things were true at once. I could see them both. "The east gallery," she said. 40 meters of outer hull access. Technically inspection access, actually something else. "Technically," I said. "I'll note that as well," she said. "There may be value in preserving such spaces in maintenance specifications. A station that has somewhere to sit quietly and look at what's actually. There is a station that functions better than its own records reflect." "I've thought so for 6 years," I said. "It's nice to have it confirmed." She looked at me for a long moment. The amber gold and the silver ring and the gallery light, and the transit tunic that was plainly transit tunic, and also now, very clearly not just a transit tunic, and the ankle that was going to be fine, and the 11 days on this route, and the D7 corridor, and the fold-down bench and the pace. "The reason I told you," she said, "is that you had been treating me as if it didn't matter what I was. I wanted you to know that I knew that. It's not the usual condition." "I didn't know what you were," I said. "You were a person with a hurt ankle in a locked corridor. That seemed like the complete situation." "Yes," she said, "that's exactly what I mean." One of the attendants spoke again, quietly. She acknowledged it and turned back to me. "Safe posting Oren Mies," she said. "Safe route Velsorn Keithai," I said. She turned, and the attendants arranged themselves accordingly, and they moved toward the lift lobby at the east end of the gallery. At the door she stopped, without turning around. "The bench angle," she said. "You were right that it's better than the viewport. You see more of the far run." Then the door closed. I sat in the east gallery for a while after that. The transit lanes continued their business. Another carrier in approach Velkareth configuration, larger than the courier had been, lower slung, the kind of vessel that moved through the outer compact corridor with purpose and weight. The outer marker cleared again. The beacon string pulsed steadily, the next way station out on the Thresholvath run, the same pulse it had been making since long before I arrived here and would be making long after I left. There was a card on the bench beside me. I hadn't seen her put it there. Sovereignty issue formal, the kind used for courtesy designations in transit contexts, the Velorvath seal on the front. On the back in standard compact script, courtesy designation, Velsorn Keithai, third heir, Velorvath sovereignty, extended to Oren Mies, compact way station Thresholvath 9, in recognition of assistance rendered, 202600809. Designation on record. Below that, in a different hand, not the formal record print, something written directly. "The bench angle is better. You were right." I held the card. Read it twice. Put it in my breast pocket, which was not the correct protocol for found items in the East Gallery, and which I did not particularly care about. Outside, the Velkareth carrier completed its approach. The beacon string pulsed. The outer marker held clear. I had fixed a junction seal on D7 and filed the tag for the follow-up report, and I was going to get the correct procurement reference by end of shift and file the 4th replacement request to the correct tier. And 2 supply cycles from now, the secondary gasket on junction 9 was going to be the right composite grade, and the breach alarm on D7 was going to stop repeating at 6-second intervals, and I was going to know it was fixed because it would stop being broken. I was also going to add the junction box bracket to the maintenance log. Left side, 4 years off alignment, working loose in the next temperature cycle. That was in the record now. And the East Gallery, 40 meters of outer hull access, technically an inspection corridor, actually something else. I was not certain what I was going to do about that. It was harder to log than a bracket. But I thought it was worth noting somewhere that the station had a space that functioned differently from what the record said, and that the function it actually served was more useful than the official one. That was the work. That was what the work was. Honest and direct and present in the same way every day regardless of who was watching, and accurate regardless of what the comfortable version of the record said. I sat with the beacon string until my handheld chimed the half-hour shift reminder. Then I stood, pocketed the handheld, took one more look at the transit lanes through the viewport. The next way station's beacon pulsed steady and patient in the dark beyond them, and went back to work. The fourth replacement request for the D7 junction seal was on the procurement desk by end of shift. Correct specification reference, correct tier, correct documentation. I knew it was going to be resolved this time. That was enough.